Hello and welcome back to another Craig and Dave Unscripted. So last week we were talking to you about how to get the most out of revision, and we talked a lot about effective revision, efficient and ineffective revision. We won't recap all of that now. If you're interested, go back and watch last week's episode. But the important bit from that is we summarised that the most important ways to revise were space practice, retrieval, and interleaving. And we talked a lot about that. And we promised at the end of last week's video that what we would do today, and probably in the next couple of videos, is talk to you about how we've really embedded some of those effective, proven, pedagogical effective revision techniques into our Smart Revise product. So that's what we're turning to this week, and we're going to start. Let me just take that off the screen by talking about flashcards, we'll discuss a bit about flashcards. What are they? Why they're effective, and then obviously we'll show you how we've implemented them in Smart Revise, and why we feel you can get the most out of them using our product. So first, Dave, everyone knows what flashcards are, aren't they? But I mean, what are flashcards? Because this is not a new thing, obviously. I remember making flashcards when I was revising, which was a long time ago.
Yeah, absolutely. So flashcards are very small pieces of card, usually, where you write a key term on one side of the card, and then you write a definition or explanation of that term on the back of the card. And what's important here is that you have the smallest number of words possible, really, both in the term that you're trying to remember and the definition or explanation of it. So you don't want these cards to contain loads and loads of information, because then it effectively becomes notes and not flashcards. And then you have a deck of these cards that you can then use to revise from. So people might know them by different names, but that's what a flashcard effectively is.
Yeah. Now, these have been around for ages, long before, obviously, people started turning them into electronic and online flashcards. But the reason they've stuck around and the reason they're still so popular is they are proven to work, and there's a number of reasons they're proven to work. So we're going to talk about that a little bit, and also we're going to talk about, by the way, how not to use flashcards, because as with all good revision techniques, there are good ways of using them and also sort of less effective ways. So we're going to talk a little bit here about active recall, metacognition, and drilling. And Smart Revise very much supports two of these, and it was a deliberate choice that we avoided one of them, and we'll explain why. So what are we talking about here when we say active recall? For those that don't know, what is active recall, Dave?
Active recall really is about stimulating your brain to continually recall knowledge. I mean, the forgetting curve is real. We've talked about the forgetting curve in the past. We've got another episode that you might want to have a look at on Ebbinghaus' forgetting curve and how we overcome it. But in essence, what we're talking about with the active recall there is making sure that where our brains are forced to think, by continually asking and answering questions, then our brains are kind of triggered to take action. And by constantly stimulating our brains with flashcards, because the information is quite concise, we can get into active recall. So we're talking about frequently trying to recall knowledge with flashcards, and typically you would do this in the run-up to an exam. So typically students would create their flashcards a few weeks, perhaps a couple of months ahead of the exam, and then almost on a daily basis, and we'll talk about frequency a little bit later, but traditionally almost on a daily basis, students would then engage with their deck of cards by looking at the definition or the term on the front, or the definition on the back, flipping the card over and having a look at either the term or the definition explanation on the back. And so that's what active recall is all about. It's about having this concise body of knowledge that you can continually commit to your memory over a period of time by actively recalling that knowledge, by bringing it back to the fore. So that's what we mean by active recall, and obviously flashcards are perfectly placed to enable that practice to happen.
Yeah, and for avoidance of doubt, sorry, I leant off camera there, and it was a bit further than I was expecting. So sorry for that, Dave. I thought, what on earth is he doing? Do you remember these?
I do. So we used to produce physical flashcards.
So this is exactly what we're talking about here.
Yeah, and we used to, put these for sale on our shop for students to buy. They were actually very popular, and if we didn't have Smart Revise, we would still be continuing to sell these flashcards. But we've kind of evolved, and being completely honest with you, the logistics of getting these printed cost effectively and then getting posted out to you cost effectively started to become more and more problematic, and it just became, not that we were ever using it to make money. It was really more of a service, because we would make pennies out of these cards. It was more a service to schools and students and teachers, but it just became a little bit sort of cost prohibitive, really, to give you value for money, because we didn't want to be charging you £20 for a deck of cards. It didn't seem reasonable, so we decided to stop selling them, and instead, we've now got the facilities of this in Smart Revise. So that's well done for digging that out, Craig. That's
well, I mean, that was it. I mean, literally, that's what a flashcard is. And obviously, traditionally, you'd make them yourself, buy a little bunch of index cards from your local stationery store, as you say, definition one side, and or a term on one side, or a question answer on the other. You'll notice also the color coding on these. We'll talk about that in a minute. But and obviously, we say this quite a lot when we do these videos. Everything we do in Smart Revise you can do without using the products, but obviously, we're just making things easier. I mean, here's one thing. I mean, there's our stack of flashcards for this is GCSE OCR. This one. So there's by leveraging technology, there's some benefits. Carrying those around with you everywhere, it's a a cumbersome thing. Whereas obviously translating this now into our Smart Revise product, have your smartphone with you, away you go. So
if you lose a card as well, if you have that big deck of cards and then you lose a card, or let's say that you've got them in different decks and you've put elastic bands around them and that sort of thing, and then the cards become a bit crumpled and you drop one on the floor, and you accidentally put the cards in the wrong decks and this sort of thing. They're great, but we've sort of evolved now. Everyone's got, well, I'll say everyone, not everyone, but most people now have got a mobile phone, or perhaps they've got a tablet device, and just like people are now replacing their sort of cards, their debit and credit cards, with being able to just do transactions on their mobile phone. Kind of flashcards are now going that way for us as well. It's nice to have the physical card, I understand that, but if you've got a mobile phone, then you've got your cards, in a very handy place. You're not going to drop one.
Oh, and I should point out before we move on, these are no longer for sale. But after this video, please don't come to me and say, I'm amazed I still had a box of these knocking about. They're actually from the old spec. So we don't print these anymore, unfortunately. But hopefully we'll convince you why using our virtual flashcards and Smart Revise is the way to go. So why do flashcards work? We've talked about active recall. I'll just do drilling quickly, and then we'll return to metacognition. So drilling is literally the concept of repeating the revision process, going over the facts again and again and again. And this is a concept we've talked about before. And say last week, we talked about spaced learning, revisiting topics regularly, going over a topic regularly, and then maybe after a week, and then after a month, but never forgetting the concept, coming back to it. And that process helping to move that concept from short to medium to long-term memory, and constantly revisiting. We've talked, as Dave said, about the forgetting curve and the idea of spaced learning, returning. So that's all we mean by drilling, and flashcards support that very well. Obviously, you don't just look at your flashcard and go, oh, virtual memory, I got that right, brilliant, revision done, off I go. Because if you're revising this at the start of year 10 or year 12, by the time you've got to the exam, if you don't return to this concept, concept, chances are you will have forgotten it. So essentially that's what drilling is. It's the idea, and it may be unpopular to say it here, rote learning, but the idea of constantly returning to the concepts, keeping them fresh in your mind, creating those cognitive links and moving concepts from short to long-term memory.
It's interesting. It's interesting that I remember at primary school learning my times tables, and we would do them sort of in sync and in rhythm with the teacher.
Remember that.
And so we would do, sort of like 1 times 2 is 2, 2 times 2 is 4, 3 times 2 is 6. And we would kind of just sort of be memorizing, in effect, the the patterns and the sort of lyrics, as it were. And then if someone said to you, well, what's 7 times 8? You can recall it because you are so familiar with 7, 8 to 48, and that sort of thing. But it was interesting when I trained to teach, and this was back in 1997 for me. It had gone out of fashion, and this idea of rote learning was seen as a negative thing. That's not the way to learn, and people would often cite Skinner as from the educational research and say no, that's it's a method of learning, but it's not good, it's not efficient. We should be approaching this in new ways. And I, of course, being a newly qualified teacher, just believed all this and sort of went with it. And, myself thought maybe rote learning wasn't the way forward, even though, of course, I'd completely remember my times tables. And then it was only a bit later in my career that I started questioning things and not just believing things because people were telling me, but actually thinking about, well, what's my evidence in my own classroom? What's my own experience? How do I know this is not effective? And, I started experimenting a little bit with this idea of, memorizing facts and doing that active recall and that drilling. And I found that it was effective. And actually, now people are saying, drilling is effective. So there you go.
And it's interesting. I think it's taking a balanced approach to all the pedagogies and not taking one in isolation, because you can, obviously, if the only way you taught was to stand at the front of the class and rote learn and drill facts every day, there'd be no inspiration in your teaching. Students would be bored. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about looking at modern pedagogy and saying, well, it shows that the forgetting curve is true, that space learning and retrieval practice works. Well, that means elements of revisiting facts again and again are effective. Now, call that rote learning if you like, but that doesn't mean you become a boring teacher. So it's taking all these things and working out the best way of delivering them. Okay, let's return then. So why do flashcards work? Active recall, drilling, space learning, metacognition. Now, that's something we deliberately don't do in Smart Revise, and we'll get onto that in a minute. But what do we mean by that then, Dave, for people who don't know? And why is that something we deliberately chose not to put in our electronic version? Because we have a very good reason, obviously.
Yeah, so metacognition is this idea of, instead of having a passive process where you're simply just reading and using the material you're given, it's about turning that into an active process. So metacognition with flashcards traditionally is about you making your own flashcards. So rather than just buying a set, downloading a set, you actually make your own. So you use your notes, you use your textbooks, you use your revision guides, whatever it is, to make your deck of flashcards with the appropriate terms on the front, and then the definitions or explanations concisely written on the back. Okay, and so it's seen as a good thing to do because of the positive effects of metacognition using an active process. But we don't do that. And again, this is another situation where we've sort of questioned the thinking here a little bit and thought about it a little bit more deeply for ourselves. And whilst we agree that revision should be an active process and it shouldn't be a passive process, and we'll elaborate more on that in a moment, there are dangers, I think, with engaging with the metacognition too early in the process of flashcards. So if you get students to make their own flashcards, or you as a student, you make your own flashcards, here are some of the risks. Okay, firstly, you've got to be absolutely sure that you have captured all the relevant keywords from that specification so that you haven't got cards missing effectively. Okay, so how are you going to do that? You're going to pore over the specifications. Well, they're written for teachers. They're not written in a way that is really intended for students. They're not hard to read, but you could miss key terms, you could overlook key terms, you maybe wouldn't see the nuance in some of the language that's used in the specifications. Maybe you'll use past papers. And that's a good source to look at where they've asked, state and describe questions in the past. And you can use the mark schemes then to create your deck of cards. But of course, none of the past papers are going to cover every single term that you need to know. And if a term has been in a past paper, whilst it will still appear in a future paper, it's less likely to appear in that future paper. And so you're just in danger of capturing terms that are less important than perhaps some of the other terms. When it comes to writing the explanation or definition on the back, that's quite a skill process. And we mentioned this in the last video, that actually making effective notes is it's a higher order skill. It's not trivial to do it properly. And so if you're trying to take something now that is a body of knowledge and you're trying to consolidate that down into the things that are most important, then that is a skill. And I'm not saying students can't do it. They can do it, and with practice they do it increasingly more effectively. But why take the risk of a student not accurately recording what is important? Okay, so let's just exemplify this for a minute. So maybe you look at the specification and you say, oh, here's a keyword, ASCII, okay, ASCII. I'm going to capture that and I'm going to write my definition on the back. And what you choose to do as a student when you write your definition on the back is you write the American Standard Code for Information Interchange, because that's what you've seen in your textbook or your revision guide as an explanation of ASCII, right? But you need more than that. Because for exams, you need to know that ASCII is a character set. You need to know that it's a 7-bit character set that's extended to 8-bit. And it's related to Unicode. Now, there's a danger that you're not going to capture those sort of 3 important facts that I just told you simply by using your own notes. And there's a risk that you're going to capture information that's not inaccurate, but it's inappropriate for what you're trying to achieve here, which is to get marks in an exam. So metacognition is really important in terms of turning what could be a passive process into an active process. That is really important, but don't try and do metacognition too early in the stage of using flashcards. You are far better off using terms and definitions that have been pre-prepared by known and reliable sources. And Craig and Dave are one of those, reliable sources. We're not the only one. We're not trying to say here that you should only use Craig and Dave's terms, otherwise, you're not going to have all the things that you need. We're not saying that at all. There are plenty of other providers, of terms, and there are free sets out there. For example, from the National Centre of Computing Education, you can get them. But what we're saying is, it might be better that you do actually get a set rather than trying to prepare them for yourself at this stage.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what we're saying here. If you use Smart Revise, one thing we're proud of here is that we pore over the specification. If we're not sure, we seek exam board clarification. What do you think? What do you think this term means? How are you expecting it defined in an exam? So there's some reliability in the information you're looking at, and we've checked it. We're not perfect, but we'd like to think we've done a very good job. So as with all revision techniques then, so that's why flashcards work, this idea of active recall, spaced learning. But as with all revision techniques, there are less effective or inefficient ways of using them. We've got a couple just want to highlight here before we actually show you how we've used flashcards and Smart Revise. So I'll take one. Flashcards are not a great method for last minute cramming. So this is not sort of like, oh right, night before the exam, I've got my 300 terms, and I'm gonna cram flashcards. So that's not really the way to use them. As we've been saying all throughout this video and the last video, you're better off using flashcards in whatever form you have them, over time, space learning, and ideally from the very first time you come across the term. So, we've been saying this, Smart Revise is our course companion. You're there in year 10 or year 12. You've been taught your first topic, let's say it's system architecture, and you've just learned 20 new terms, program counter, ALU, control unit, MAR, and all the rest. You've got your first 20 terms. You've got those flashcards, and then you start revising those over time using space learning. And as your body of knowledge grows, and then you learn your next topic, networking and databases and cybersecurity, you're adding to that process. So using flashcards regularly, space learning over time, and Smart Revise supports all of this, is the best way to use them. Don't to be tempted to use them as a last minute cram. By that point, it's probably a bit too late. So that's the first sort of big no-no. Don't see flashcards as sort of like the cram before the exam. What else should they avoid then, Dave? We had two points, I remember.
Yeah, the other one that you should avoid is just thinking that getting into the habit of carrying your deck of cards around with you everywhere, is a good thing, and that you should, wherever possible, get the cards out and have a look at it, and do a couple of cards at the time. Now, it might feel counterintuitive, this, but that is not very effective. Studies have proven that that's not an effective way of using flashcards, because one of the things with spaced practice is that there is a little bit of a delay between when you look at some material and then when you look at it again, okay? So if you're carrying these flashcards around with you all the time, and at every possible moment you're having a look at one of the cards and putting it away again, having another look at card, putting it away again, not proven to be that effective. It's more effective for you to say, right, this is my 20-minute revision stint, and I'm going to engage with all the cards, not the whole deck, but all the cards that I've prepared for this particular session. And we'll talk about the best way of preparing cards for a session in a moment. Okay, so don't stop the video at this point and think, oh, now they're just going to show off Smart Revise and talk about how good it is. We want to talk about how Smart Revise is used with a known system of flashcards. Okay, so don't stop the video now. We're going to be talking about the Leitner system a little bit later. But in essence, yeah, this idea of just doing the odd card now and again is not very effective. You should commit to, I'm going to do a stint of revision, and in this stint, I'm going to look at all the cards that I've prepared for this particular session. That's what you should be doing. Feels a bit counterintuitive, doesn't it? Because, in the past, again, not with any sort of basis, I've often thought, better to just do them, as often and as regularly as you can. And if you do one here and you do one there, that sounds like a good idea. And the research says no, you should make this a dedicated revision practice, and not treat the cards as an ad hoc process at all.
Right. Okay. Well, I'll tell you what then. Let's dive in to see how we've implemented our electronic flashcards. So Dave's just going to share the screen there. So as you know from Smart Revise, you've got your course. I'll just dive in there, and we've got three main modes of engaging with your revision. And what we're going to focus on today is what we call terms mode. So there are electronic flashcards. And the first thing you notice as soon as you hit terms mode is we have two options for you to choose from: reflective mode and interactive mode. So let's just talk us through briefly then reflective mode first, Dave. So you've gone to terms, you click reflective mode. What is it?
Yeah, so what reflective mode does is it shows you the front of the card effectively. So here we're looking at the term binary. And then you're thinking to yourself, okay, how would I define binary? What would I say if the question was, describe binary or state the purpose of binary? What am I going to say here? And then you flip the card, And you can see the back. So binary is a numbering system in which there are only 2 possible values for each digit, 0 and 1, a base 2 number system. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, I'm not sure I would have worded it quite like that, actually. So now I've got some options and I can record my confidence. And one of the features of Smart Revise is actually you have to record your confidence. It doesn't let you go any further unless you do.
Yeah.
So what you should do initially is set all your cards to be red, set them all to be the kind of sad face to begin with. And we'll explain why in a moment, okay? But set that to red. And you'll see the little progress bar there shows that being red. Having done that, you can now go on to the next term. So I can click my arrow. The next term is a binary shift. Okay. So again, I think about what I would say to describe a binary shift. I flip to the back of the card. Binary shift is moving the bit pattern in a register left or right a given number of positions. And you'll notice also in Smart Revise, you get these handy little bits of advice. So you remember I said earlier that you don't want to cram loads of stuff on the card because you want it to be concise. But at the same time, there might be things that are useful to know. And what we've done is we've put those in a little advice portal. So they don't clutter the card, but they are nonetheless there. So here we can see a left shift multiplies by 2 and a right shift divides by 2. Now, binary shifting does a lot more than that, actually. And at A level, it would be appropriate to know a little bit more. But for GCSE, a purpose of binary shifting, that would be fine. To multiply the number by 2, divide the number by 2, that would work. Okay. So again, I have to record my confidence. And as I've just said, what you should do to start with is just record them all as red, to be honest with you. Okay. We'll go on to the next one. I'll just show you what happens if we change that. So the term bit, flip to the back of the card, the smallest unit of storage in the computer system, either a 0 or a 1, a binary digit. Okay. And so I got other options. I could say, actually, I'm okay with that. I'm going to turn that green. But there is a methodology you should be using for choosing whether it's red, amber, or green. We will come on to that in a moment. But in essence, that is what reflective mode is. There are a couple more options before we leave it. The first is you can then build a deck. So if you only want to see the cards that are red or that you haven't ever looked at, you can do that, or maybe just the ones that are red. And you can build your deck that way. So I'm only looking at the cards now that I signaled as being red, and that will be extremely useful using the Leitner method that we'll describe in a moment. So I could do that, or I could just choose the ones that I haven't assessed myself on so far to make sure that actually I don't have any cards in the not assessed deck. That would be a good place to start. And you'll notice that it automatically changes the card I'm looking at to reflect those filters. One other thing that you could do, if I just go back to the course home a moment, before going into terms mode, I could choose my topic filters. Now, it may be that the teacher has disabled that, and so you don't have control over your topic filters because the teacher is going to unlock things as you're learning them. But if you have got full control, you could then focus on a particular topic. You could say, I'm only interested in seeing cards about network security, for example. Update the filter, go back into my terms mode, reflective, and now I'm only going to see cards that are relevant for 1.4 network security. I can still build a deck, so if I only want to see the cards that I don't feel I'm very confident with, I can still apply those filters on top of the topic filters, so I can filter my decks in different ways. But the critical thing with all this is that in Smart Revise, you can't go on to the next one until you've recorded your confidence, which is a critical feature for the Leitner method that we're going to talk about in a moment.
Yeah, so that's reflective mode. So we have a slightly more involved mode, and actually we're bringing a bit of metacognition back in here now, causing you to think a bit more. So having said we took that out because we've built the deck for you, we have a mode which kind of like supports the thinking and those links a lot more, and that's interactive mode. So initially it will look very similar. Dave's just changing some topic filters there. So yeah, you'd select terms and you'd select interactive mode. And initially it looks very similar. Well, so what's different here? Why are we calling this interactive mode? What's the extra thinking process the student has to go through here?
So the difference here is I can't flip the card. Okay, you'll notice flip is grayed out. And instead, I've got a box above it that says type your answer here. And it says define the term program counter. Okay, so now I have to write what I think the program counter is. And as Craig said, this is where we're bringing back in the metacognition, because this is where we should be turning what could have been quite a passive process, looking at the cards, flipping them, selecting confidence, looking at the card, flipping, selecting confidence, could be quite passive. Now, this is a very active process, because now I have to write my definition for the program counter. So I'm going to say, holds the address of the next instruction. Apologies if this is a bit small on your screen, but you get the gist of what we're doing here. Having written my definition, I can now flip the back of the card. So let's flip it. Okay, this is what it says on the back of the card. Holds the address of the next instruction to be executed. I didn't have that bit, okay. A small memory location inside the CPU, didn't say that, to assist with the fetch execute cycle. Right, so why is this important? Well, if this was a 2-mark question in an exam to define or state the purpose of the program counter, then I'm at risk of only gaining 1 of the 2 marks there. What I wrote was factually correct, but it wasn't comprehensive enough, really. And so I'm going to judge myself as red here, because I don't think I sufficiently had that. And I'm going to try and remember next time I come across this card, I'm going to write to be executed on the end of my definition there, and make 1 small little addition to move me up to the orange. And then again, I can just go on to the next card and take it from there. The other thing that I can do is I can look at my last answer if I wanted to. So if I'm comparing my current answer in this revision session with the last answer I gave in a previous revision session, then I can do that. So there we are. Last time I just said it was the program counter. I obviously didn't know. Okay, so you can see how you can compare what you did in the past to what you're doing now and get a sense of that sort of progress over time, and see if in this latest go at the question whether you actually forgot something that you'd remembered before. And it's an opportunity there to just reflect on not just the definition as we've written it here, but also what you've done last time as well. So that's reflective mode.
Right, marvelous. I'm just going to unshare that in a minute, although you might want to bring that up. So we've mentioned we're going to talk about the Leitner system here, which is an excellent way of using flashcards and incorporating loads of effective revision techniques we've talked about in the past, about space learning and retrieval. And look, I'm going to make a short confession here, right? I don't go to bed every night and read new pedagogy books. Dave and I, we like to say that what we do is based in research and pedagogy, and we think about the learning process and why we're putting features into Smart Revise and why we create teaching resources. But I'll be honest, the Leitner system was something I hadn't heard about until Dave told me about it very recently. But what was beautiful, and one of the reasons we're going to talk to you about it now, is when I read it, I was like, wow, there's real research there. It is specifically talking really about flashcards, or you can use it in other ways, but it's backing up all the things we've been saying: space learning, retrieval practice, and it's a great system to be using with flashcards. So go on, Dave. A 101 on the Leitner system. It's not very complex. It's beautiful, isn't it? Really, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. So in a nutshell, it's this. Okay, you have 3 decks of cards, and a card can only exist in one of the decks at a time. Okay, and so you could label these whatever you like. You could label it deck 1, deck 2, deck 3, box 1, box 2, box 3. It doesn't really matter. In Smart Revise, we're labeling them as sad faces, regular faces and happy faces, as it were. And then we're putting color codes on there. So we've got red, we've got amber, we've got green. Okay, so comparing the Leitner system to Smart Revise, our box 1 is like red, our box 2 is amber, our box 3 is green. Okay, so if you go with that for a minute, What you then do is interact with those 3 decks on different days. Okay, so in your box 1, those are the cards that you are least comfortable with. Those are your red cards. Your box 2 are the ones that you're gaining confidence with. Those are your amber cards. And then your box 3, you are confident with them, but you shouldn't forget them, because if you don't engage with it over time, you will forget them. That's the forgetting curve. And that's your green box. Okay. So what you do is every single day that you want to engage with your flashcards, you engage with the red cards, the box 1 cards, and you do those every day in every session. Okay, pretty straightforward. You've then got your amber cards, your box 2 cards, okay, and you should engage with those on Tuesdays and Thursdays. All right, so you're engaging with everything in the box 1 in the red every day, every time you do a session. And on Tuesdays and Thursdays, you're going to include into that set the amber cards, the box 2 cards. Okay. On Fridays, you should then be looking at your box 3 cards as well as your box 1 cards. Okay, so your red cards and your green cards. So the red cards, every time you do a session, they're always there. And then on Tuesdays and Thursdays, you include the amber cards. And on Friday, you only include the green cards with the red cards and not the amber cards. Okay, and so by doing that, your green cards never completely disappear. They are being part of the active recall, but they're coming back less frequently. Okay, so if you think about it, your box 1, your red cards, they're coming back every single time. Then your box 2 cards are coming back twice as often, as it were, and then your green cards are coming back once as often. Now, how do you then get cards in different decks? So you're looking at a card that's a red card. Now you can see why I said set all your cards to be red to start with. Okay, put them all in box 1 to start with. Then go through them, and as you're going through them, if you think that you've managed to get that definition and it's secure, don't put it straight into the green box. Okay, put it into the amber box. All right. And then, you will, at the end of that session, have some cards in the red box and you'll have some cards in the amber box. You won't have any in the green at that stage. Okay, that's okay. Right, so next time you do a session, if it's Tuesday or Thursday, then you're bringing in your red cards and your amber cards. And when you're looking at your red cards, if you're gaining confidence with them, you can put them in the amber. And when you've got an amber card, if you feel that you've got the confidence with it, you can put it into the green box 3. And if you don't think you've got the confidence with that anymore because you've forgotten something along the way, you must move it back into the red box, okay, back into that box 1 again. Okay, when it gets to Friday, what you're doing on Friday, as we've said, is you're using all the cards in the red box and you're using the cards in the green box, okay, boxes 1 and 3. If you come across a green card that you had previously said you were confident with, and then previously said you were confident with again, that's how it ended up in the green box, you have a look at it, and actually you've forgotten something in that green card, and it's no longer as secure as it used to be. This is the critical bit. You don't move it to amber. You don't move it to box 2. You move it to box 1. It goes from green to red. Okay, and the same thing happens actually with our quiz mode with mastery. If you get a question wrong, then the system says, "Oh, this is problematic. You thought you'd mastered it, and now you haven't. This is a big problem," and it'll prioritize those questions. And so you should be doing the same thing with the flashcards. Okay, if it's at any time a card is in that green box 3 pile and you don't nail it, it should go all the way back to being in the red pile again. And that, in essence, is the Leitner system. Okay, so quick summary then. It's a lot to take in. 3 decks, red, amber, green. Look at the red ones every single day. Look at the amber ones on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And look at the green ones on Fridays.
There you go. Right. That's the system. And as Dave said, it's If you get it right, it moves up a box. You're more confident. If you get it wrong, it's going all the way down to the bottom. And I was just going to jump in there a second and say, yeah, that's exactly what we've been doing with Smart Revised Quiz Mode and Mastery over time. Apart from there, also, you have to get a topic correct 3 times in a row to get it mastered. And the question keeps coming back, less often, but it keeps coming back in the future, at spaced intervals. And if you ever get it wrong, it goes all the way down to red and unmastered. And a lot of people think that's quite harsh, but you need to look at it like this. You could get a question right 12 times in a row during the process of revising. If the 13th time you answer that question is in the exam and you get it wrong, you get nothing. So it's this idea of constantly revisiting. Once you've mastered something, or with the Leitner system and the flashcards, once it's in the green box, the box 3, you don't forget about it. Yes, we're only revisiting it now once a week on a Friday. I've got it. I still remember it. Brilliant, stays there. But at the point we go, yeah, I've forgotten that. That's when it goes back down, and now you're recapping it regularly and more often and moving it up. So yeah, it was beautiful. Introduced me to the Lily system, actually, Dave, because it was like, this is so much of what we do. So much of this is embedded into our product already. It supports the leading pedagogies and the research about how people learn, about how people remember and recall information. So yeah, it was something we definitely wanted to share with you today.
Yeah, and I just want to have just a quick look at it in Smart Revise before we sort of wrap up. So just to sort of show you exactly how this matches into Smart Revise. So what I suggest you do first time out, when you build a deck, only include the cards that are not assessed to start with. Okay, build your deck, flip and turn to red. Okay, have a look at it, flip, turn to red, turn them all to red. Okay, that's what I suggest you do to start with. Have a look at it, flip. And this is really just about seeing the range of cards that you've got here and just kind of engaging for the first time with these terms. Okay, so you get them all red. Then when you've got a future revision session, what you should be able to do, because you shouldn't have any in not assessed at that point, you're then going to have a look at all the red cards. So you set the filter cards to just the red ones. Okay, build the deck. And as you're going through these, if you feel confident with that, having flipped the back, you can move it up to the amber. Okay, go on to the next one. Not so confident with that. So I'm going to flip it, leave it red. Okay, move on to the next one, flip it. Yeah, happy with that. I'm not putting it green. I'm putting it amber. I'm happy with it. Put it amber. Okay, there we go. So that's it. And that's my session done. So then on a Tuesday and a Thursday, I now include the red ones and the amber ones, okay, on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Build the deck, okay, and here we are. So you can see I've only actually got 12 cards here at the moment, but you can see how many are in each deck by doing that. Okay, so that's Tuesdays and Thursdays, exactly the same process. We're going to flip the card, have a look at it. And if this is an amber card, which this one is at the moment, and I'm no longer confident that I got that as accurate as I needed to, I'm going to put it back into red. Okay, on to the next card. Clock speed, flip the back. Still happy with that. It can stay orange.
No, that goes up to green.
Sorry, yeah, or it can be promoted to green. That's right. So we'll flip the card, and yes, I'm going to promote that one to green. Okay. So that's your Tuesdays and Thursdays. On a Friday, you're then going to include the red ones and the green ones. Okay, so the green ones are only being looked at on a Friday. If you're engaging with this every single day, then that's only once a week, which is fine. Okay, so we're going to build the deck. And now I'm just looking at the reds and greens. And this is what differentiates Smart Revise from anything else that's out there, really. This idea, not only can you record confidence, and you have to record confidence, otherwise it doesn't let you continue, but you can also include the ones that you're not happy with, as well as the ones that you are happy with. So you're missing out the amber ones on a Friday. And, you know, that's quite a unique thing to be able to do there. So that's how you use the Leitner system in Smart Revise to gain, you know, quite a significant advantage in your revision. And what you may or may not know is that behind the scenes, it's collating data for your teachers, and your teachers are able to have a look at the cards in your decks and those sorts of things if you belong to a class. So there we go.
Brilliant. Well, so it's enjoyed doing that little video there. As I said, last week we taught you about what made effective revision, and I'll be honest, when we made the video last week, I'd not heard of the Leitner system there, and there we were talking about space learning, retrieval practice, the forgetting curve, and then this week we can actually show you that in smart advice with flashcards, and being able to show you another method of using them, the Leitner system here, and how it supports everything we were talking about last week. So I hope you've enjoyed that session. We'll see you again next week. What are we doing next week? Have we made our mind up yet, Dave?
Yeah, well, we're going to continue into part 3. So we're going to be talking about how to get the most out of exam-style questions, and why it's really important that you engage as much with the marking process as you do with answering the questions.
Brilliant. Right. Well, we'll see you again next week when we'll visit that. Thank you, everyone. Cheers. Bye-bye.